Lapland. March 1944. A Finnish soldier named Eimo Koivunen. Eimo Koivunen is skiing for his life. Soviet troops are behind him, closing fast, and his legs are giving out. In his pocket is his unit's entire supply of a small German pill, a stimulant meant to be shared among 30 men. His hands are too frozen to count out a single dose, so he swallows all of it. What happens next should have killed him. Instead, it turned him into a legend and exposed one of the strangest secrets of the Second World War. Because the deadliest war in human history wasn't just fought with steel and gunpowder, it was fought on drugs. By the late 1930s, the world's armies faced an old problem with new urgency. Modern war didn't sleep. Tanks could drive through the night. Bombers flew missions that lasted 10 hours or more. The side that could stay awake longer, march farther, fight harder, resist exhaustion itself, would hold an advantage no weapon could match. And in Germany, a chemist believed he had found the answer in a laboratory in Berlin. In 1937, the Temmler Pharmaceutical Company patented a compound called methamphetamine and began selling it over the counter under the brand name Pervitin. It was marketed to the German public as a cure for almost everything: fatigue, depression, low productivity. Housewives took it. Students took it before exams. There were even chocolates laced with the drug, sold in candy boxes. Germany, without quite realizing it, was becoming a nation of stimulant users. The military took notice. At the Academy of Military Medicine in Berlin, a physiologist named Otto Ranke, a Regi-Coup, began testing Pervitin on university students. The results stunned him. Test subjects stayed alert through the night. They performed complex tasks while sleep-deprived. They reported feeling confident, even euphoric. Rank concluded that fatigue, the eternal enemy of every army in history, might finally be defeated by chemistry. He called it a decisive weapon in a war that would be won by whoever could hold out the longest. But Rank's miracle pill had a dark side he chose not to dwell on, and the German army was about to distribute it on a scale the world had never seen. In the spring of 1940, Germany prepared to attack France. The plan depended on speed, a massive armored thrust through the Ardennes forest, a region the Allies considered impassable. Panzer divisions would have to drive day and night, without rest, to reach the French rear before anyone understood what was happening. Human endurance was the weak link in the plan, so the Wehrmacht placed one of the largest drug orders in military history. Between April and July of 1940, by most historical accounts, some 35 million tablets of Pervitin and similar stimulants were shipped to German Army and Air Force units. The soldiers called them different names: Panzerschokolade, tank chocolate, Stuka tablets, after the dive bombers, pilot's salt. Whatever the nickname, the effect was the same. German troops crossed into France wired on methamphetamine, and the results seemed to defy military logic. Tank crews drove for 3 days and nights with little or no sleep. Infantry marched distances that exhausted armies twice their size in the last war. French and British commanders, planning around the normal rhythms of human endurance, kept finding German spearheads where no German spearhead should have been able to reach. France, a nation that had held for 4 brutal years in the First World War, collapsed in about 6 weeks. To be clear, historians agree the drugs didn't win the campaign. Doctrine, radio communication, air power, and Allied mistakes did most of that work. But Pervitin removed a limit that every general since Alexander had been forced to plan around: the need for sleep. One German general reportedly described the advance as men moving forward as if in a trance. For a brief window in 1940, the German army seemed to have chemically abolished exhaustion. But chemistry always sends a bill, and it was about to come due. The first warnings came from the medical corps. Soldiers were writing home begging for more Pervitin. Among them, a young infantryman named Heinrich Bell, B-U-R-L, who would later win the Nobel Prize in Literature. His wartime letters to his family asked, again and again, for the pills. Doctors began reporting the other side of the miracle: soldiers who couldn't sleep even when they were allowed to, heart problems in young, healthy men, crashes so severe that troops needed days to recover from a single stretch of chemical alertness. There were reports of soldiers dying of heart failure and of erratic, aggressive behavior that some historians argue may have contributed to atrocities against civilians and prisoners. a debate that continues to this day. Leonardo Conti, the Reich health leader, tried to pull the brakes. In the middle of 1941, Pervitin was placed under Germany's opium law, making it a controlled substance requiring a prescription. On paper, the free-flowing river of methamphetamine was dammed. In reality, the invasion of the Soviet Union had just begun, and on the Eastern Front, the rules quietly stopped mattering. Millions more tablets flowed east. In the frozen winters outside Moscow and Stalingrad, exhausted, freezing, encircled German units were issued Pervitin simply to keep men on their feet. The wonder drug of the blitzkrieg had become something closer to a crutch, a way to squeeze the last hours of function out of soldiers who had nothing left. And Germany was not alone, because by now, the Allies had joined the pharmaceutical arms race. The British had captured Pervitin tablets from downed German airmen and crashed vehicles in 1940, and their chemists quickly identified what they were dealing with. The response was not condemnation, it was competition. Britain turned to Benzedrine, an amphetamine, chemically a close cousin of the German drug, and began issuing it to Royal Air Force crews flying long bombing missions over Europe. The logic was brutally simple. A pilot who fell asleep over the North Sea died, and so did his crew. Before the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942, General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army had Benzedrine on hand, and by some accounts, tens of thousands of tablets were distributed to troops in North Africa. American forces followed, adding amphetamine tablets to aircrew kits and issuing them across multiple theaters. By the end of the war, by some estimates, British and American forces had manufactured tens of millions of energy tablets of their own, and in the Pacific, Japan ran perhaps the most aggressive stimulant program of all. Japanese pharmaceutical companies produced methamphetamine under the name Philopon, and it was distributed widely to pilots flying marathon missions, to soldiers on night attacks, to factory workers on the home front pushing through endless shifts for the war effort. In the war's desperate final phase, stimulants were reportedly given to kamikaze pilots before their last flights, young men chemically fortified for a mission from which no one returned. Across 3 continents, the largest war in history was being fought, on all sides, by armies that were, to a degree their publics never knew, pharmacologically enhanced. But in Germany, as defeat closed in, the search for a chemical edge was about to cross its darkest line. By 1944, the Third Reich was losing on every front, and desperation bred monstrous ideas. German researchers began work on a new compound designated DIX, a single pill combining cocaine, methamphetamine-style stimulant, and a morphine-derived painkiller. The goal was a soldier who felt no fatigue, no fear, and no pain. And the testing ground was not a university laboratory. Trials were conducted on prisoners at the Sachsenhausen, Zahkshausen concentration camp, where inmates were forced to march in circles for days carrying heavy packs, while doctors took notes on their collapse. It is one of the war's lesser-known crimes, human beings used as disposable instruments to measure the outer limits of chemical endurance. The war ended before DIX could be mass-produced. The men it was tested on deserve to be remembered not as data points but as victims, which brings us back to a frozen forest in Lapland, and the man who accidentally became the war's most extreme case study. Aimo Koivunen was part of a Finnish ski patrol in March of 1944 when it was ambushed by Soviet forces. The Finns broke contact and fled on skis, with Koivunen breaking trail through deep snow, the most exhausting position in the column. As his strength failed, he reached for the patrol's shared supply of Pervitin. Gloved, frozen, and under fire, he couldn't separate one pill from the rest, so he took all 30. What followed reads like fever dream fiction, except that Koivunen lived to tell it. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge so violent that he skied clean away from his own patrol, and then lost consciousness while still moving. When his mind returned, he was alone, deep in the wilderness, with no food and no ammunition. Over the following days, in a haze of delirium and hallucination, he kept moving. He evaded Soviet soldiers, he hit a landmine, and survived the blast. He lay in a ditch for days in temperatures far below freezing, waiting to die, and didn't. He ate pine buds and, by his own account, a bird, raw. When Finnish troops finally found him, he had traveled roughly 400 kilometers, about 250 miles. He weighed around 43 kilograms, barely 94 pounds, and his heart was hammering at close to 200 beats per minute. Doctors were amazed the overdose alone hadn't killed him. Koivunen recovered and lived into his 70s. His story is often told for its absurdity. But look closer, and it's the entire history of the wartime drug program compressed into one man. The impossible endurance, the vanished judgment, the body pushed past every natural limit, and the bill that always comes due. When the shooting stopped in 1945, the drugs did not simply disappear. They came home. In Japan, enormous military stockpiles of Philopon flooded the civilian market, and the country plunged into what is widely described as the world's first major methamphetamine epidemic, with hundreds of thousands of users by the early 1950s. In Germany, Pervitin remained available in various forms for decades. Veterans on every side carried dependencies out of the war that no one had a name for yet, and the military logic that started it all never really went away. Amphetamines were issued to American forces in Korea and Vietnam. Even in the 21st century, some air forces have authorized so-called go pills for pilots on extremely long missions, under medical supervision, in tightly controlled doses, but resting on the same old bargain. Alertness now, paid for later. The Second World War is usually told as a story of machines, the tanks, the bombers, the landing craft, but it was fought by bodies, human bodies, with human limits. And when those limits stood in the way of victory, nearly every major power reached for a pill. The strange truth of the frontline drug war is that it worked. Briefly, brutally, and then it broke the very men it was meant to strengthen. Exhaustion, it turned out, was never really defeated. It was only deferred. And somewhere in the ledger of that war, alongside the battles and the borders, is a quieter cost. The minds and bodies of millions of soldiers who were asked to fight past the edge of what a human being can endure. If this story surprised you, the archives are full of chapters like it. The history they don't put in the textbooks. Subscribe to Field Ghosts so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments which forgotten story of the war you want us to uncover next.